Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel. We are halfway through the 2020s, seeing that we're in 2025, halfway through the not-so-roaring 20s, but the music has been good, so today I'm going to take a look at some of the best metal releases of the half-decade so far. Let's get things started here. Number 20, I'm going to go with Parasomnia by Dream Theater, the only album on this list from 2025 right now, but, the year is still young, and this is the first studio album since Black Clouds and Silver Linings to feature Mike Portnoy on drums, back in the band, and you can feel his presence on this record, and, the reinvigorated energy of the band as well, and, I enjoyed a lot of the material from the Mike Mangini era, though I don't have too many nice things to say about the Astonishing, but that was hardly his fault. Anyway, though, this was a huge comeback for the band in a lot of respects. I think having Portnoy back in the band is a huge deal, and you can definitely hear the influence of a lot of the band's past works with Portnoy on this record, and as always, you have amazing instrumentation on here by the band. John Petrucci has some mind-bending solos as per usual, and James LaBrie, who I know gets a lot of flack these days for his vocals, sounds really good in the studio here in my opinion. Some standouts on this record for me include Night Terror, Dead Asleep is awesome, Midnight Messiah, Bend the Clock, great ballad. Then you have the epic The Shadow Man Incident to close things out. I was supposed to see them live on this tour for their 40th anniversary, then I got sick and couldn't go at the last minute, which was a super bummer. But, hopefully they come back around and play some stuff from this record live once again, because I really want to hear it. And once again, it's great to have Mike Portnoy back in the band, and his return, I think, marked their best album since at least 2009. Number 19, gonna go with Self-Titled by League of Distortion. Great underrated band. I've talked about them a lot on the channel. One of the newer bands that I really enjoy, coming out of the scene, but really not a new band anymore. I mean, they've been around for a few years now. They have 2 records, but their self-titled debut was a real hidden gem from 2022. Fronted by Anna Brunner, her vocals are so powerful on this record, and on their sophomore record, Galvanize, as well. You have some crushing riffs on here, big choruses, and soaring vocals, especially on tracks like Wolf or Lamb, My Revenge, LOD is great, Rebel by Choice, The Bitter End, Do You Really Think I Effing Care? So many great songs on here, and, they kind of sound like kind of a mix of, I'd say, Hailstorm and power metal, so I definitely recommend checking them out. I'd say I start out with their debut record, my number 19 on the list. Number 18, gonna go with Black Harvest by Green Lung, an awesome band that I just got into recently, and I very quickly fallen in love with their catalog. Green Lung are such a throwback to listen to. Think early Black Sabbath meets modern day Ghost. They've got a pretty unique vibe to them, pretty underrated folk doom metal band here, and they only have 3 records so far, but Black Harvest is definitely their best in my opinion. Similar lyrical themes to Ghost, and like Ghost, they write songs with big hooks and memorable choruses, and Black Harvest is just a lot of fun to listen to, with great tracks on here like Old Gods, Graveyard Sun, Upon the Altar, Doomsayer, and more. Maybe a little bit poppier, but otherwise not an album or a band that I think would have sounded out of place, around the time of, early Black Sabbath or Pentagram. Number 17, gonna go with One Assassination Under God, Chapter 1 by Marilyn Manson. Great comeback record here. This is Manson sober and sounding great in his first record since We Are Chaos, and all the legal stuff that ensued over the last several years, but he's back and now possibly better than ever. This is the best record since Hollywood, in my opinion, from the Manson catalog, and really takes the listener back to the days of classic Manson. And I just saw him live last week, and it looks and sounds like you're seeing prime Marilyn Manson. He's really found his voice once again, and lyrically, I'd say he's far more motivated than he's been on some of his more recent records, and I think Manson writes best when he has a purpose. Some of those late 2000s and 2010 records, we're just kind of going through the motions with, some moments of greatness, but in general, not a lot of urgency, I would say. But here he's writing with a purpose and newfound motivation. Kind of reminds me of when Alice Cooper got sober and launched his big comeback in the mid-80s with, The Nightmare Returns and Constrictor and all that. But this is just classic Manson all the way through. No signs of complacency at all on this record. Every song on here is a banger, including some of my favorites on the album, like the title track, No Funeral Without Applause, Not If You Understand is so heavy. That's takes you back to Antichrist Superstar album. As Sick as a Secret Within, great single. Sacrilege is a lot of fun. Raise the Red Flag, Sacrifice of the Mass, right? Death is Not a Costume. Awesome album here. A great album from top to bottom. One of my favorites from last year. Number 16, let's go with Warlocks, Grim, and Withered Hags by Hellripper. Some great black and thrash here by a band that I love but really never get the chance to talk about on the channel. And, it's weird because this album blew up when it came out on the internet for a few weeks and then just kind of got forgotten forgotten about and lost in the shuffle with other new releases, which happens a lot in the online metal community. But I think this was a great direction for Hellripper to go in, where, James' guitar work could really shine, emphasizing the solos and the heavy riffs. I really like the tempo change on this album as well, and I dig tracks like The Knuckle of E, Mr. Storeworm, and the title track as well. So many great songs on here. It's a fantastic record, definitely worth checking out if you're not a fan of Hellripper, but if you're a Black and Thrash fan, would highly recommend. Number 15, let's go with The Enduring Spirit by Tomb Mold. Here's another record that, was the talk of the metal community for like a month before it got lost in the shuffle with other death metal releases from 2023, which was a great year for new death metal, and I feel like the last few years I've really seen a lot of bands stretching the boundaries of death metal, which I love to hear, because one of my biggest criticisms, and I've talked about this on the channel, but one of my biggest criticisms of modern death metal acts is that it feels like everyone's trying to be a Chuck Schuldiner or Cannibal Corpse, but it's so great to hear something that sets itself apart, like what Tomb Mold accomplished with The Enduring Spirit, incorporating elements of prog, jazz fusion, a real 70s progressive influence and more. You have some melodic psychedelia feel to this album as well, and this record really does feel like the natural evolution of their sound following their first 3 albums, and can't wait to hear how they follow it up. Following that up here with number 14, let's go with Sermons of the Sinner by KK's Priest, the return of KK Downing and the debut of his solo project KK's Priest, and I have a lot of fond memories of this record here. As a matter of fact, reviewing this album was the first video I ever did on the channel back in 2021, which, needless to say, it was not a very good video. It was a terrible review. It's not up anymore, so don't bother going to look for it, but the album itself is amazing. The guitar work on here by KK really shows why he's missing in Judas Priest at this point, especially now that, Glenn Tipton is mostly retired from the band, but KK can still play and can bring that classic Priest sound, and you have Tim Ripper Owens here on lead vocals, kind of a throwback to the Ripper era of Judas Priest, but with much better lyrics and production, I think, and KK still great live as well. Saw him live last year with KK's Priest in support of their second album, The Sinner Rides Again, which is another fantastic record. They're 2 for 2, but KK has still got it, and that was a great bill with Accept as well, and I think the live stuff by KK's Priest more than held its own against the stuff they performed from the Judas Priest catalog, and really love songs on this record, like Hellfire Thunderbolt, Sermon of the Sinner, Raise Your Fists, Hell for the Priest, Return of the Sentinels, great, Brothers of the Road, a lot of awesome tracks on here, and KK Downing, even though he's not in Judas Priest anymore, still doing some incredible work late in his career. Number 13, let's go with 72 Seasons by Metallica from 2023, the follow-up to Hardwired to Self-Destruct from 2016, and even if you're not a fan of modern day Metallica, you can always rely on the band for some great riffs, but Metallica are my second favorite band of all time. I love this record here, and was super psyched when it came out, and for me personally, I love all eras of Metallica, so what's really cool with this record is I feel like you can draw parallels between a lot of tracks on here and every era in the Metallica catalog. There are a lot of songs where I can pull from and say, well, this wouldn't sound out of place on that album, and this song wouldn't sound out of place on that album, so in that respect, they kind of pulled from all different eras here, which I thought was really cool, and between, some of the great standouts here on this record, like the title track, Screaming Suicide, If Darkness Had a Son, In a Murata, great album closer, and Too Far Gone. I think this is their best record since Load from 1996, and, I think ever since Death Magnetic, where the band returned to a more thrash metal-oriented sound, the band have been, moving back in the right direction, with each record improving on the last, including 72 Seasons, my number 13 on the list. Let's stick with thrash here for my number 12, and go with Blood in the Water by Flotsam and Jetsam, thrash metal legends who have very quietly been doing some of the best work of their careers on their more recent records, including Blood in the Water from 2021. This is a very consistent, thrashy record. None of the songs on here are over 5 minutes, so it's a very, to the point and concise record, and I think one of the most mature albums the band have made up to this point, in their career, which now, with the release of their last album from 2024, it spans, 15 albums now, and, it's really been the evolution of their sound that's really interesting to follow, since Ugly Noise from 2012. They just seem to be getting better and better with age, and some favorites here on this album for me include the title track, Burn the Sky, A Place to Die, The Walls, Cry for the Dead, Too Many Lives, Grey Dragon, Re-Aggression, and the closer 7 Seconds Till the End of the World. Awesome record here by Flotsam and Jetsam. Do not sleep on modern day Flotzilla. They sound awesome. Number 11, we have Swallowed by Hell by Morbid Saint. This was the first time that Morbid Saint had gotten together to write new material since 1992. Destruction System finally got released, as a new album, I guess you could say, back in 2015, but they had not released an album of, brand new material since Spectre spectrum of death. So this was a pretty big deal in the thrash community when it came out, and I was excited for it, but this record far exceeded my expectations. Yet another example of, a legendary thrash band that's doing some career-defining work later into their careers. The classic breakneck aggression that was there almost 40 years ago on the debut is still here, still present on tracks like Rise from the Ashes, Swallowed by Hell, Bloody Floors, Burn Pit is fantastic, Bleed Them Dry, Psychosis, Killer Instinct. This whole album is unrelenting from beginning to end, and, it kind of makes you think about what could have been had the band made new music over the past 30 years rather than just laying dormant. Let's get things started in the top 10 here with Senjutsu by Iron Maiden from 2021. My favorite band of all time, Iron Maiden. Of course, Senjutsu would be somewhere in the top 10, and the only reason it's not higher on the list is because of the production. This definitely was not Kevin Shirley's finest hour, but otherwise, Maiden did it again. A record full of proggy, fleshed out, and lengthy tracks with well-thought-out songwriting by the band. Bruce Dickinson sounds great as always on lead vocals. A little drowned out in the mix, I would say, but still fantastic when performing the new stuff live on the tail end of Legacy of the Beast and on the Future Past tour. Not as strong as the Book of Souls, I would say, but an excellent record nonetheless. This is Maiden following the evolution of their sound, getting more and more progressive. The band are in no hurry here. Everything gets a chance to breathe. Standouts for me include the title track. You have Stratego. It's a lot of fun. Writing on the Wall, which I think was a great single at first. Kind of got tired of it, but still, it was a fun live track on the last tour. The Darkest Hour is great. The Parchment, Hell on Earth is a fantastic way to close out the record. Probably some of the more introspective lyrics that Steve Harris has written in, many years. Great stuff here, and I'm always a little bit biased towards Iron Maiden, right? Like I said, they are my favorite band of all time, and I think at this point I'm probably incapable of disliking anything Iron Maiden gives us by now, but for me personally, I love Maiden, and so this has to be in the top 10 somewhere. Number 9, let's go with PetroDragonic Apocalypse by King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, the hardest working band right now in rock and metal, and I had a pretty big list of albums to choose from in their catalog just for the past 5 years, 11 to be exact, since 2020. King Gizzard have such an eclectic sound and range. It's really unbelievable. And this record is the band moving in a more thrash-oriented progressive metal direction, which is really cool. They can pull off such a wide array of styles, but I love the band taking a heavier approach here, similar to Infest the Rat's Nest from 2019. King Gizzard kind of weave in and out of whatever genres they want, but, they more than hold their own in the metal scene as far as I'm concerned when they want to, with tracks on this record like Dragon, Gila Monster, Motor Spirit, and Flamethrower. All the songs on here, I think, complement each other really well, and this album has a unique vibe and feel to it. It's as vibrant sounding and heavy as it is experimental, and, just like the rest of their massive catalog, just a lot of fun to listen to. Number 8, gonna go with Last Will and Testament by Opeth, one of my favorite albums from last year, a late album of the year contender, and honestly, I think if I had more time with it, it could have scored even higher on my year-end metal ranking for 2024. I like the new Pith sound, I guess you can call it that, but the return of the death growls and other death elements was a welcome comeback in my opinion, for the first time since Watershed from 2008. You have great guitar work throughout by Michael Egerfeld and Frederick, and, really cool concept album here as well. You have Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull hanging out in the studio, playing flute on several tracks here too, which is very cool. Just a great mix of, death metal vibes that have been missing for years with the band's progressive sound, mesh really well together, and hands down their best record in years. Next at number 7, gonna go with Terrasite by Cattle Decapitation from 2023. Stylistically, this is a continuation of what they were doing with Death Atlas and Anthropocene, and to a lesser extent Monolith as well. Great technical death metal here by Cattle Decap. Some really proggy elements on this album as well, mixed with some death grind too, which is kind of cool. Fantastic production on this record as well. Every song's just a banger, and I love tracks on here like We Eat Our Young, Scourge of the Offspring, The Insignificance, The Storm Upstairs, Just Another Body. Great 10-minute epic to close things out. Awesome stuff, and this is just an unrelenting record full of great songs from top to bottom, and I didn't think it would be possible for Cattle Decap to top Death Atlas, but I think they might have done just that with Terrasite. Definitely one of my favorite death metal albums of the last half decade. Number 6, Impera by Ghost from 2022. I had to put Ghost on this list somewhere, even though I know not everybody considers Ghost to be a true metal band. I never subscribed to that. I always consider them metal, even if they do put the ABBA in Black Sabbath, and was thinking about putting their most recent album, Skeleton, on the list too, but, the album just came out last month. I thought it was a bit too soon, but Impera had to be in the top 10 somewhere. This is when I really started to listen to Ghost regularly, and I was blown away by this record. There's just something about Ghost, where the hooks feel so catchy and the choruses feel so big and memorable that you just can't get them out of your head. And Impera accomplishes that, with all the hallmarks of the classic Ghost sound, the band getting poppier here and more radio friendly, which I don't mind either. Ghost continue to top themselves, and this record was the perfect way to follow a prequel, in my opinion, and to capitalize on the band's newfound mainstream success. It's all killer, no filler here, and one of those records that I go back to a lot more than others in my collection. Breaking into the top 5 here with Helloween and their self-titled reunion album with Michael Kiske and Kai Hansen from 2021. A much-needed reunion here, and in my opinion, the Pumpkins United lineup is perhaps Helloween at their strongest ever. This album does a great job of blending past and present with, soaring melodies and harmonized vocals, and the band sound creatively rejuvenated throughout, especially on tracks like Out for the Glory, Fear of the Fallen, Angels, Indestructible, Robot King, my favorite song on the record, Orbit, and then Skyfall, right? Great kind of, song that goes right into Skyfall, so I love that. This is for me, some great power metal, but also some proggy moments as well, and I'm not too big of a fan of the Andy Darius era, so personally, I was thrilled when the band reunited with Kiske, and I think having 3 singers in the band now only makes them stronger, and I can't wait to review Giants and Monsters when it comes out this summer to see how they follow up this modern Helloween classic. Definitely a top 5 Helloween record for me, maybe only behind Walls of Jericho and the 2 Keeper albums. My pick for number 4 is going to be Absolute Elsewhere by Blood Incantation. Like I was talking about with Tomb Mold, I really love seeing bands stretching the boundaries of death metal as far as they can go, and perhaps no band better exemplified that lately than Blood Incantation with Absolute Elsewhere, and it's an album that I think, we're going to look back on years from now as an era-defining record, and, one that will probably be very influential in the years to come as well. Some people want to describe this album as Pink Floyd meets death metal, and that's pretty accurate, I would say. The band fused death metal with elements of classic progressive rock, electronic, and space rock as well, and the album is best listened to, I'd say, in one sitting as, one big body of music, and it's so easy to get lost in, it never gets boring, and it remains unpredictable right up to the very end, and even if you're not a fan of death metal, there's something here for anyone who enjoys 70s prog rock. Top 3 now, I'm going to go with Titans of Creation by Testament from 2020. Definitely a recurring theme on this list. Another legendary band doing some of the best work of their careers later into their catalog. And I feel like Testament have just been getting stronger and stronger with every release since the reunion on Formation of Damnation. And Titans of Creation was just the next step in that. This is the tightest the band have sounded in years, with really sharp songwriting, great riffs and solos, as well as powerful, raspy vocals by Chuck Billy. And the band are currently working on a new album. And if this record was any indication, this next record should be full of bangers, but it's going to be hard to compete with tracks on here like Children of the Next Level, World War III, Dream Deceiver, Night of the Witch, City of Angels, False Prophet, right, The Healers, Code of Hammurabi, and Catacombs to close things out. At number 2, I'm going to go with Invincible Shield by Judas Priest. Priest followed up the incredible Firepower record with Invincible Shield, and this album is just classic Priest through and through, kind of a blend of Firepower and Painkiller, which I thought was pretty cool, and Rob Halford sounds the best he has in years on this album. I think a couple years off the road during the pandemic did wonders for his voice, because he has just some soaring vocals on this album, accompanied of course by the classic Priest Axe Attack. And 2024 was a great year for new wave of British heavy metal, and Priest once again reaffirmed that they still have a lot left to offer with what's in my opinion their best album since Angel of Retribution from 2005, with some great tracks on here that make it hard to argue. Songs like Panic Attack, Serpent and the King, Invincible Shield, Devil in Disguise, As God Is My Witness, Crown of Horns, and more. Before I get to my number 1, I do have some honorable mentions here. Want to give a shout out to Infernum in Terra by A Pale Horse Named Death, You Won't Go Before You're Supposed To by Knocked Loose, The God Machine by Blind Guardian, and Rock Believer by The Scorpions. All great records, but I can only fit 20 on the list. And last but not least, my favorite album of the half decade so far has got to be my favorite record from 2024, and that was The Mandrake Project by Bruce Dickinson. Bruce's first solo record since Tyranny of Souls, and probably his best solo offering since Chemical Wedding. This album really stands out, I think, amongst his solo catalog. I mean, it's just the right amount of over-the-top and theatrical with some really cinematic storytelling by Bruce, mixed with, some great heavy metal. Bruce sounds incredible here vocally, too, with standout tracks, that I enjoy, like Afterglow of Ragnarok, Many Doors to Hell, Rain on the Graves, Resurrection Men, the original If Eternity Should Fail, Eternity Has Failed, Mistress of Mercy, Shadow of the Gods, and the great Sonata, Immortal Beloved to close things out. Killer album closer there. And again, like I said before that, Iron Maiden or anything Iron Maiden related, anything with Maiden association is going to, be weighted a little bit higher, I'd say, on my list, but you take the Iron Maiden link away here, and this is still a masterful record. So that wraps up this list here, taking a look at the half decade, the best metal albums of the 2020s so far. You guys can see my picks right over here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload, and let me know down in the comment section below what have been some of your favorite releases of the 2020s so far. I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CUD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.